So this presentation I put together is called How the Other Side Sees It, Writing Your CS Resume the Way a Company Wants. And so I'm Jamie Smith. I'm former RPL avionics lead, and I'm currently an embedded software engineer at Relativity Space. This fall at my job, I got assigned to reading a whole bunch of intern resumes submitted by people just like you guys. So this taught me a ton about what me and my coworkers are looking for in a resume. So kind of going to go over basically 4 parts to this presentation. The first one is, what do I look for in a resume? Secondly, like do's and don'ts in a resume based on a lot of stuff that I may or may not have seen people do in real resume submissions that I thought was worth noting. Third section is going to be about cover letters. Why do you write them? What should you put in them? And then last but not least, resume review, where a couple people have submitted their resumes for me to go over, and I can kind of say, like, how would I read them as a resume reviewer? So for starters, I'm basing this on my experiences at Relativity over the past couple months. I think that this is a good representation of how a lot of tech companies review resumes, especially comp sci resumes, but I can't guarantee that. Other companies might prioritize different things or have additional criteria. But that said, a lot of the resumes I saw didn't follow some of the fairly basic rules, and there's some very easy ways to improve them that are not that difficult. So I'm really hoping that even if not necessarily every company is going to be doing this the exact same way, it'll still be useful as a way to generally improve some things on your resume that you may not have known about. So first question is, what does a resume actually do? This is something that I wasn't really sure about when I started college. I was like, I don't know, you just put everything on a paper, right? And I kind of just made a list of all my experiences, not really thinking too hard about what it was going to be used for. And back at that point, USC had some more serious like resume counseling, but I've heard that this is not really a thing anymore, which is really a bummer because it was actually kind of useful. So hopefully I want to try and talk about, instead of just making a resume be a place where you put stuff, I want to look at like, what does a resume do for someone like me reading that resume? So in my opinion, a resume is your way to say, like, here's my life experience so far, and please contact me if you think I'm a good fit for this job. Broadly speaking, companies are going to look for 2 things in a resume, which is that you have sufficient general experience to handle the duties of an internship, and also that you have technical experience with things that translate well to that role. So first of all, one of the top 2 things is, does this person have relevant technical experience outside of class? So like, I really want to see, have you done actual technical work before that's similar to what you'll be doing in the actual position? This could be like at lab, it could be like at a previous internship, could be something else, but I want to see that you have like relevant technical experience. And the definition of similar can be pretty broad. Like, it just has to be similar to something that someone wants, especially with the relativity job application where there's a lot of jobs behind one application. It just needs to be similar to one of the possible ones, like backend dev, front-end dev, embedded dev, data analysis stuff. And I'll talk about this a little more later, but I don't think that class experience really counts in the same way as outside of class experience. And the main reason for that is, as someone who like course produced, aka TA for a class for 2 years at USC, I feel like classes tend to be sort of hand-holdy in a way that like lab work and company work isn't. So it's not really the same kind of thing. The other thing I look for is, does this person have experience with the specific technologies that they'll be using in their job? So this is actually a bit different from a full-time role. At least for a full-time comp sci position, we put a lot more weight into like, what's your sort of general experience, what's your general strategy type of thing. If you have experience in the general area, that's probably fine. But for an intern position, it's not, an intern is only going to be here for like 12 weeks. That isn't enough time to teach someone C++. So if you already know some like the specific frameworks and tools that we use, that's going to give you a big leg up on your general job at Relativity or at any other company. So this would be something like programming language, build systems, collaboration tools. If you have already experienced, if you have already used this tool, then you'll be able to work a lot more effectively. You can like hit the ground running. So that's a big plus. Is it absolutely required? No, but it is a big plus that can help distinguish one person's resume from someone else's. So other things that I'll look for on a resume are Is there something that talks about like leadership, collaboration ability, work ethic? This would be like experience with leading a team, having some non-technical experience at other jobs, that sort of thing. Also, do they have experience with software collaboration? Because not some people may not have this experience, some people do, and don't put it on their resume. And this is something that we really look for. Like, it's a huge plus if someone's used like Git, someone's used GitHub, someone's used GitLab, continuous integration stuff. That's very useful. Another thing is if the person links to their GitHub or some other sort of code sample, what does the code quality look like on that? Like, I don't know, sometimes I'll take like 5 minutes to read through what they posted and say like, is it well documented? Is it clean code? That can be a plus or a minus. What is the person's like personal or open source projects? In particular, like projects you've released to the public, projects you've been maintaining for a long amount of time. It's not a problem if you don't have like open source projects, but if you do have ones that are like show your sort of dedication as a programmer, that can definitely help your case. And then other things that I don't value as much on a resume, I don't really care that much about GPA or your school. Like, frankly, it's just not a very reliable indicator of skill. Like, people who are really skilled can come from a really unknown school or have a not great GPA. But I will say that if you came from like a really good school and had a really high GPA, then that's at least a tiny bit of a plus. So it doesn't really hurt to include that information, but it's not something I look at very closely. Other stuff absolutely takes priority. Also, class projects. As I said, like if you just say, hey, I did the minimum required to pass this class and did this project, that doesn't really tell me a lot. So I've worked as a course producer a lot at USC, and I was the one who held people's hand through these projects for a long time. I know how hand-holdy it gets. Also, like courses taken, like the problem is that schools really vary wildly. They're all over the place. So if it's just saying like, oh, I've taken like an embedded systems course, that could be like baby's first Arduino course, or it could be like actually a really serious course like EE250 style where they get super into the weeds. And it's just hard to know from the name of the course. And I'm not going to like go and find out like what's the syllabus for this course at your school. It's not standardized enough to be useful. And keywords wise, like if you have skills that are listed in your keywords, but you don't talk about your experience or you use the skills, then I might just assume this is something you did for like 10 minutes at a hackathon once, and it's not something you actually used much. So just saying you have a skill without really referencing where you used it, I don't really value that a lot. That makes sense? Any questions on these? I'm kind of curious, Ava, is it the same for you or is it different for you?
Yeah, I think the type of resumes I get are more oriented towards the hardware side. I would say that it's very valuable if there's a project you can say you've personally designed, tested, built, or analyzed. If you have physical pictures of what you did, or a website that shows the manufacturing process, even better.
Interesting.
I think also I see this reoccurring point, especially from students who participated in student design teams, where the language in their bullet points of the resume for folks on the Mechie prop side would be like assisted in a layup or participated in a static fire. And that kind of language is vague because I can't tell if you were foundational and really there during integration, if you wrote procedures, if you were there and leading manufacturing of the components you said you participated in, or if you were just someone who like stood there and watched and learned, but didn't necessarily create content. And so clarifying language like that, especially for a project that you may have really owned, helps the recruiter understand what your skill set is and what level of experience you have.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I think I wanted to talk about that a little bit later too. It's like it can be really vague language can be really a problem, and having something concrete to put on is awesome. Oh, and for those who don't know, Ava is our former propulsion lead, so she's reviewing more like mechanical engineering resumes, whereas I'm reviewing comp sci resumes. So we don't need comp sci people to have physical projects, but mechanical engineers, absolutely. So now let's talk about some resume do's and don'ts. So One thing that's a basic do for comp people especially is say what programming languages and tools you work with on each project. Like it's good to have something listed under keyword. This is almost exactly what Ovid just said. If it's good to have something listed under keywords, but it doesn't prove to a resume reader that you have a lot of experience with it. The best way to prove like, yes, I have experience with this skill is to say, what have I done with this language? Or what have I done with this tool? Give some examples. So like, here's an example from my resume where I talk about my experience as a course producer. So like, so like for this one, design assignments, instruct students for like advanced C++ course. So reading this resume, it's like, okay, this person taught people C++ stuff, so they probably know C++. Created advanced test scripts, utilize Google Test to create automatic checkers. Like, okay, Google Test, that's a skill. Here's where the person used that skill. Led a lab section where I taught students various advanced C++ topics. Again, like this is C++ experience. So if I'm reading this resume, then I'm like, okay, here's where this person learned C++. Here's where they learned Google Test. Here's where they used it. It's just as a general rule, if you have like bullet points on your resume that don't reference specific technologies, that's kind of could be a warning sign. Like a lot of your, especially if your bullet point is talking about something technical, it should reference specific technology or as specific as you can get. Another thing to do is keep your resume short. Get rid of extraneous info. Like I want to see the stuff that's relevant to the company, relevant to the position. I don't want to wade through extraneous stuff. And if your resume is just packed to the gills with text, that makes me unhappy because I have to read through all of this and a lot of it isn't relevant. And it's just tiring. Like, just so keep an eye on brevity. Keep thinking about like, what is this part doing? Is it actually relevant? If it's not relevant, then consider deleting it. Another thing to do is list your technical internship and list your lab experience first and foremost. Like these are the top two things I'm looking for intern positions. I want to see technical previous internships. I want to see lab experience. You have other technical work that also fits into those categories, that too. So those are the things I'm looking for. Those should be front and center on your resume. Also, list open source work, especially projects that you have developed and or contributed to for a long time. Like, to me, it's kind of a difference between if you say I worked on this for a couple of days or a couple of weeks, then that's okay. It's better than nothing. But if I see that you have worked on something for months, for years, that really shows that you have strong skills and you have strong work ethic and that you're just willing to commit to something for a long time. Shorter projects can be valuable, but they better be good. And also for projects, I always like to see if you say like, I started this of my own volition, or like, this is a personal project I'm working on for this purpose. So that kind of helps make it clear that it's not a class project. No one told you to do it. You did it on your own. You're doing it like for your own growth, for your own project. So those kind of projects can be really valuable to me as a resume. Also, mention collaboration. This includes like working on or managing a team and also like software collaboration tools like Git and GitLab. I think this is overlooked often, but software collaboration is a real skill that takes some time and effort to learn, just like anything else. Like, I'm sure there's a lot of people who struggle with like Git pull requests. Like, how do I leave a comment? Someone rejected it. How do I rebase? How do I deal with these conflicts? That's something that a lot of people run into. And if you say like, I know how to deal with this stuff, that's a plus to your resume. If you can show that you already know this stuff, that gives you an edge over other candidates. Another thing to think about is do show a reasonable number of positions in a reasonable amount of detail. This is a common misconception. You do not have to list every place you've worked on your resume. This is something that I admit to suffering from for a while, where it's just like, okay, select star from previous positions, dump onto resume. But no, for an intern position, as a reader, I would like to see around 2 to 4 previous positions in a reasonable amount of detail, which give a reasonable overview of the jobs you've done. Like more than 4 positions, and it honestly just gets hard for me to remember, like trying to think of everything someone did at the same time. And as you add more positions, you're forced to include less detail about each one, making your resume more vague. So like try to choose the 4 most relevant positions. And while this is very situational, as a general rule, try to have like, I don't know, 2 to 4, maybe 5 bullets for each position that say what you did there. It's like, don't make it like one position, half a page, unless it's your only one. But Also, don't make it like one bullet. Just try to include a reasonable amount of detail about what you did there. Make sure that the reader can get a solid picture of like, what was this? What did you do? Another thing to do is keep the audience in mind when building your resume. So this is like people who have multidisciplinary experience, especially like CECS folks, double majors. So keep the audience in mind. I want to see most of the detailed info on your resume be for the stuff you've done that's actually relevant to the job. Like if you are someone who has like 1 year of PCB experience and 1 year of CS experience, I really want to see more detail about the CS stuff, and I'd rather you only glossed over the PCB stuff. Like you can say that you did it, but I don't need to hear all of the details. This was a very common mistake, and like it's great to be multidisciplinary, but you don't want to let being multidisciplinary mean you can't list all of your CS or all of your EE experience on your resume. Because it becomes stuff I have to filter out. Like, okay, it's cool that you know how to build a circuit board, but if I'm interviewing you for like a back-end software position, I don't need to know about like parts you CADed or specific like circuit boards you designed. Of course, if I'm interviewing for an EE position, I do want to hear that information. So it really just depends on what are you applying for? What's the experience in your resume that's relevant from that? So that'll clean your resume up, make it easier to remember, and let you include more detail about the stuff that is relevant. Kind of a double benefit. Honestly, like thinking about this, I think it might make sense to have 2 or more versions of your resume if you're someone who's rather multidisciplinary. Like you could have one that's PCB stuff and one that's mostly like hardware design. You could have one that's like mostly embedded software, one that's mostly web design. And if you make them ahead of time, you can choose the one that's the most appropriate when you submit to a job. And this is something where I went through all of college without realizing I should do this. Like half my resume had PCB stuff on it, and even for all the software jobs I was applying to. And I wondered why relativity was like the only place that gave me the time of day when I submitted my resume. It's because it was like half PCB stuff, and I was applying for software jobs. And I was like, hey, look at all this PCB stuff I can do. Companies were like, I don't care about this. Probably. That's probably what's going to happen. So just keep the audience in mind. Customize your resume to the type of company you're submitting to if you have a lot of multidisciplinary experience. Another thing to do, kind of similar to the brevity one earlier, do optimize your resume to be read in like 2 to 4 minutes by someone sifting through. Like, don't necessarily assume someone's going to take like 10, 20 minutes to go through each thing. I tend to be one of the slower resume readers with a little more detail, but it definitely varies by person. So it's good to make a sort of semi-hierarchical structure where the reader can dig into areas that seem interesting. Like if I want to know if someone has database experience, I'd start with looking for any positions where they were like back-end developer or database engineer. And it'd be good to have some labels to help me find stuff. Like if you say for this position, I was like a database engineer, or for this position, I was a software person or something. That helps me like find where on your resume is the stuff I'm looking for. Don't make it too dense. No 9-point font, please. And clean formatting is appreciated. Like an interactive design still can't change the contents. It's not going to make a bad resume seem good, but it can help your resume stand out a little more from the pile. So if you want to put some effort into like the art part, feel free to. Another thing is try to give an estimated experience level for each programming language and tool. This is one that I don't see a lot of people doing, but I think it's super useful to me as a reader when people do it. Like it might hurt a little to be honest, but believe me, this lets me as a reader trust your own assessment of your skills more. Because if you just say, I know everything equally well, I don't believe that. But there's definitely going to be some that you're more experienced with and some that you're not. So if you don't list your like experience levels, I might assume that everything is kind of, I did this for one day at a hackathon level. So like, here's an example from my resume. Like this is what it was originally, where I just had like every language on the same line. They were kind of loosely ordered, but it's not very obvious as a reader. But the way I'd like to see it, how to reformat it, is like expert languages, intermediate languages, some experience, and then like tools and platforms, significant experience, some experience. Kind of sort them out like this. Like another thing that will help is if I'm trying to interview someone, I need to figure out what language to give them an interview question in. So if the languages are all equal like this, then it's like, okay, maybe I'll just give them a Verilog interview or something. But this helps me go, okay, this person claims to be good at C and C++, so I won't give them like a C# question because they say they're not as good at it. So it may help you get an interview that's most suited to your skills. Make sense? Now, let's talk about don'ts. Everybody's favorite section, right? Let's see what definitely not to do. Do not do this on your resume. So, one thing, don't rely too heavily on class projects. So as I said, I don't count class projects the same as work experience or true personal projects. Like it's just because coursework will hold your hand in a way that real work won't. And personal projects and lab work, in contrast, show that someone is intrinsically motivated, to borrow Lauren's favorite term, by more than just, I don't want to fail this class. It shows that you're motivated to actually do the projects. And trust me, I can usually tell what is a class project. If there's multiple people from the same school who submit the same project, then like, that's probably a class project. If there's people using like kind of rare or old technologies like Java, Swing, TK-Inter, building like web apps in C, then you wouldn't actually want to use that on your own, then that's probably a class project. And I know there's going to be some TK-Inter fans who get really mad at me for that, but them's facts, you know. And if course projects are the only experience you have, then oh well, may as well put them. But really try to get some experience outside of class as soon as you can, and list that first, and list that foremost. And if you're in RPL, you probably have that part covered, just in case. Another thing, don't be too vague. Don't just say like, I worked on this project. This is one that a lot of people get into the trap of, like assuming that people know what this project is. Like, don't just say you worked on it. Say what specifically you did and using what tools, what languages. So here's actually a bad example from my own resume that I was submitting like around when I graduated. So like continued development of RPL's custom avionics sensing and telemetry module, Hamster, which flew to space, rewrote Hamster build system. That one's all right. Redesigned the lab's custom CNC system. Like for this one, like this first bullet is really frustrating because what did this use? Did this use an Arduino? Did it use a Raspberry Pi? Was it like FPGA written in Verilog? Details, please. I really, as a reader, I want to know more. This is frustratingly vague. It's like saying like, oh, I did all this cool stuff, but I'm not going to tell you how I did it. And like this one, redesigned. Redesigned using what? It just makes me cringe at myself. Oh, like this one is these two are all right. Like use redesigned CMake, fixed PCB traces. So an improved version of this would be something like led development of RPL's custom avionics system. So this is more focusing on my leadership experience. And then contributed new chip drivers, key bug fixes, and simulation systems to Hamster's C++/EmbedOS codebase. So this one talks now only about leadership. This one talks about like what specifically I did. Like I wrote drivers, I fixed bugs, I worked on the simulator project, just had many travails after I was not working anymore. And then I used C++ and I used EmbedOS. So this is like these specific skills, and this is what specifically I did. This one is all right as it is. Let's see, and then redesigned control electronics and path generation software. Like those are the two specific things I did on that. I redesigned the electronics and I redid the path generation software. It's not just redesign. You see how that's an improvement? Anyone? All right, thumbs up for Matthew. So another thing to not do, this might seem like a no-brainer, but don't link to your GitHub if your GitHub is not something you want interviewers to see. If you put a link to your GitHub, I will follow it, and I will look at the quality of the code on that GitHub. And you would be surprised by how many people do not seem to think this through. There are a non-zero amount of applications to relativity where I reduced their score after seeing their GitHub. And like good things that I want to see are well-documented projects and like high-quality projects and evidence that you're like an active open source contributor. I'd like to see at least one of those three things. Like either you use your GitHub to contribute to other people's repositories, or you have some of your own repositories. And if you have your own repositories, I want to see how you can write documentation. Like don't just do like a one-sentence README. Then do a README that's like, here's what this project is, here's what I did on it. Think of it as kind of an extension of your resume. And things that I don't want to see are projects with no README, stuff that shows you don't know how to use Git. Like if every project just says add files via upload, and you didn't actually like use Git, especially if you claim to have Git on your resume, and this is active evidence to the contrary. I don't want to see low quality code, like just stuff that like bunches of comments. It outblocks stuff with no comments, stuff that is not good, and just a completely empty GitHub as well. And I'm sure you're all thinking like, wait, but my GitHub is a mess. I don't want your viewers looking through all my random things. Well, that's why GitHub has a feature called pinned repositories. So you can highlight what you want people to look at and what you don't. You can go to your profile page and there's a link customize your pins. So you can pin specific repos that are like, hey, this is an actual good example of my work. So if I'm looking at someone's GitHub and I see this, I'll look at these pinned repos and I'll ignore the rest because clearly these are the ones that the person wanted to show me. Another option is you could just link a specific repository from your resume instead of just linking to your root GitHub profile. Like just think twice before putting your GitHub on, because I will look at it. Another thing, don't list like extraneous classes. My personal preference would be just to not list classes at all, because they're less valuable to me as a reader than work experience and projects. Classes vary wildly between universities, so it's hard for me to deduce much by reading what classes you took. But they can be a little assurance that you did at least do some real study in your field. If you really want to put some classes in, here's some recommendations. I recommend you list classes that are highly relevant to the specific job and or the core concepts of your major. Like for a firmware position, you'd want EE 109. List any relevant classes you went out of your way to take that are not expected for your major. Like, because in my case, I took the EE 220 and EE 370, electromagnetics, linear circuits, as free electives because they're not normally, they're not normal CCS classes. They might not expect that in a CS student. So saying, hey, I took these EE classes adds a little bit of value to my resume. Like I went out of my way to take these. But I wouldn't put down something like CS 104 or data structures because that's an obvious class for a CS student to take. So if I'm saying I'm like getting a CS degree, they already assume I took that class. So it's just wasted space putting that in. Another thing to not do is get too fixated on numbers. It's enough to say that you improve the performance of something. You don't need to say that you leveraged synergistic psychosocial acceptance profiles to actualize an 87.3% productivity increase in the upper 70% of enterprise caseload. I don't need to hear the exact number of bugs you closed or cases you completed. This is just 100% too much information. It sounds fake and it sounds forced. And like jokes aside, the real reason is numbers are not really real in computer science. Like if something was really bad when you got there, you might spend an hour and get 1,000 times speed up. Or if you're even certain types of problems, you could be really skilled. You could spend your entire summer working on them and do an awesome job and get like a 10% performance boost. Like if you're interning for Intel trying to improve the performance of like Core i7 processors, and you say you got like a 1% performance boost, I'm sure you're like intern of the summer. But if you do the same thing on a product that was really bad, you're like, oh, I got a 1% performance boost. That doesn't really mean a whole lot. So just without knowing the exact circumstances, numbers just don't mean much. So if you really want to show that you performed well at a position, I think it's better to, there's basically a couple ways you could do it. One way is to talk about some sort of award or recognition that you received. Like, I was recognized by my lead as a top performer doing X task. That's always a good thing to put. Or you could show your work, like go into the technical details of something impressive you did. Like, I talked to a bunch of users and found out that X was a huge pain point. So I made a multi-step plan, implemented Y new feature on the UI, saving the users significant time every day. That's something I value a lot in a resume. Like, I want to hear the details. Or another thing you could think about doing is to compare yourself to other people and show what you did differently. Like, while other people struggled to grasp X concepts, I understood it easily and made this cool thing using it. So that one can sound a little aggressive, so I'd say use that one with caution. But there's a non-0% of the time it's warranted. Another thing to do, don't pile in too many skills or projects. Like some level of branching out from just your major is useful, but there's also a point where it can be too much. Like extraneous info at some point just distracts the reader from the actual meat of your resume. Like a good litmus test is ask yourself, is there any conceivable scenario where this would be relevant to my technical or my non-technical work at this company? And if not, you might want to consider deleting it. So like, let's do a quick like case study. Let's look at my resume. So I will definitely admit, I confess, I went a little crazy and I kind of threw everything I could think of in my resume. So there's a lot of stuff here that doesn't belong. So I'm kind of interested to hear from you guys. What do you think about this? I'm gonna go have a glass of water real quick, but let me know, what do you think that we should keep and what do you think should be removed from this part of my resume? Applying for a comp sci position. Okay, Lena says remove the graphic design portion. And yeah, this is something I was kind of proud of, even though I still can't draw with my hands for crap, but I do know how to like remove the background from an image. But like, yeah, it's not really relevant for CS. So this whole section could probably be removed. Anyone else? Come on. So what do we think? Is Altium Designer relevant for a comp sci job? There's not necessarily one correct answer from this. I'm just interested to hear from people. Yeah, Matthew says probably won't need the CAD either. And yeah, in most cases that would be, we wouldn't want the CAD. Like it's useful in general as an engineering, but it's rarely relevant to a CS job. Okay, so here's kind of what I was thinking. Like schematic and PCB software, Altium Designer, EagleCAD. For a firmware job, this is relevant because a lot of times I will have to like look through schematics that other people have made and then write my firmware based on that. So for embedded position, circuit design is relevant. Though maybe for a backend developer, it would be less relevant. But on the other hand, some like the chip level design software like Cadence Virtuosos from E477, Multisims from E457, like this stuff isn't really, this stuff is used for like design chips, and it's not really relevant for a software or firmware job. And most resume readers won't even know what these are anyway. I bet. Remove them. And the only time when this would be relevant is if I were applying at like a chip design company, like if I were applying for Intel or something, then it would be relevant. But it's not for most firmware jobs. Mechanical design, like CAD, it's not relevant for most software positions. Maybe if I was doing like game design, game engine stuff, then it would be somewhat relevant. If I was doing like computational geometry, like making CAD software, then it would be relevant, but in most cases it's not. Graphic design, I would say this is not relevant, except if you're doing front-end development. Then it actually is useful if you're doing web design. But other than that, not useful. And again, this is very subjective, and it's going to determine like what is your resume focus on, and what kind of job is this. Another thing is like, okay, so here's the next one. So this is more talking about like my electronics experience at RPL. What do you guys think? Keep or remove? Come on, I want to hear from you guys.
For a primarily CS-oriented job, is the practical electronics section and a more like touch work focused bullet points less relevant?
Yeah, exactly. So like for this stuff, I would say that the practical electronics it's unlikely to be relevant for a comp sci job. And even now that I see like what a professional like hardware engineer does, like someone who does Altium schematics, even they rarely use a lot of this stuff. Just because at even a decent size, even a mid-sized company, there's going to be different people doing the PCB work and the PCB design, which is a little sad, but it's how it is. So it's good to mention that I have experience doing like hands-on debugging and repair, but I also don't need to mention like the low-level stuff. So not applying for a harness building position, like SMD soldering and rework using like oscilloscopes. spectrum analyzers, that can be relevant for firmware position, especially in a small company where you're going to have to do a lot of that stuff yourself when you're debugging a board. But like, even then, it's kind of marginal. But like this stuff, like doing crimp connectors, like putting together wiring, that's never really relevant because they're just the engineers won't be doing that professionally. So this could be relevant. This is not relevant. And then as for the digital electronic stuff, it's kind of a different thing because Microspace doesn't have any actual FPGA experience outside of class. So I've fallen into my own trap here because I haven't really used FPGA stuff outside of class. It's going to be kind of hard to get positions with. So I can honestly just remove the mention of FPGAs because I'm not applying for FPGA jobs and I don't have much FPGA experience outside of class. So can probably just remove that. So another thing is this just isn't phrased super well. Like it's a little hard to understand exactly what this means. So I think it would be better to rephrase this as like electronics debugging, significant experience using lab tools like oscilloscopes, spectrum analyzers, logic analyzers, and like PCB rework and repair, capable of using SMD rework equipment to modify PCBs that resolder large fine pitch chips. These are things that are useful for firmware positions and also like hardware design positions. Just saying SMD soldering and rework and oscilloscope and spectrum analyzer usage, that doesn't really tell me very much as a reader. Saying like, what did you use these tools for? How much experience do you have? That tells me a lot more. So this is what I would really like to see. Okay, next section. So again, I just threw everything on here that I knew how to do. What do you guys think? Any takers? Like, what do you think? Do you think it's like 3D, like knowing how to calibrate a 3D printer is relevant for a software job? Is there anyone who does? Anyone who doesn't? Come on. There's no real wrong answers here as long as you can make your case. What about like IT support stuff? Is that relevant for a CS job? Okay, Leah says most of it isn't very relevant unless you're applying for an IT or additive role. And yeah, that's what I would say. Like, well, most of the stuff is not really relevant. Like, knowing how to reconfigure a 3D printer is probably never going to be relevant for a software job. So I would lean towards removing this and just kind of, it's not really that relevant. Maybe it'd be good to have in the experience section, like I did repairs on 3D printers, but having it in skills, since it's not relevant to the job, I'd say more remove. So on the IT section, this is a little different. I'm mostly throwing like volunteer experience I had like in high school and early college onto here. And so most of the stuff's not really relevant for a CS job because they would list it like it would be an IT job. And it's not a CS, not a programmer job. Only at the smallest of companies would a programmer be doing any of this. So can remove that. However, the networking part actually is somewhat useful. Like that is something that we are sometimes looking for is people who understand how networks work. Like how do the different layers of the network stack interact? How do you like organize a larger network? That can be useful, especially if you're a back-end developer where you're going to be working with a lot of network machines. So networking is useful, but there's probably better ways to say this, like understanding networks or something, and not just networking. Okay, last one. What do you guys think? Foreign language? I feel like you can make a case for and against that, right? Lena and Matthew, what do you guys think?
I mean, unless you're applying to a position in Japan or a position where you'll need to speak Japanese, I'm not sure it'll really give you any brownie points.
And Lena says, foreign language could show you have the dedication to study something, but it's not technically relevant in most cases. Yeah, that's actually, I'm very on the fence about this myself. Like, I think it's probably worth keeping, but the likelihood that a job is going to be looking for this is quite low. And usually, if a job does prioritize being bilingual, they will usually say it on the posting. Like, I've seen a couple of job postings that say, like, we need someone who speaks Mandarin. It's always Mandarin as well, but and they will usually say that. So if the job doesn't say they need someone bilingual, they're unlikely to care. But I feel like it could still be a minor plus, and especially like for a multinational company where like there might be a chance you have to work with someone who uses another language. And it also shows that you put in like the time and effort to learn it. So I think it's not worth a whole lot. It's okay to keep it on there, but it's not worth a whole lot. So kind of go either way on that one. As for the radio stuff, I think that it's good to mention that I know how to do radio because that can be relevant for like embedded software stuff. A lot of embedded systems use radios, but saying link budgets is not a very good thing to put on here because it doesn't really tell you a whole lot. It's only a small piece of the whole picture of putting together a radio system. I might replace this section with like designing radio systems from requirements to hardware because that shows like you know how to do the whole stack. Ham radio operator, that can stay on there because again, it shows that you put in the effort to do something, and it's a certification, just like you have like I don't know a Microsoft certification, a CAD certification. Those are worth putting on there because they show effort and they're not too distracting. I would say it's kind of subjective. So basically, more of all this is you just got to look at a skill and go like, is there any reasonable chance that it would be used on a job? And if the answer is no, then probably get rid of it because it's just distracting. And in the absolute worst case, you could get some kind of interviewer who's like, "Oh, I hate ham radio operators. Oh, I hate people who know how to like spend time doing software support or something." There's a conceivable situation where it could be a bad thing if someone's like biased. I don't think that's very likely, but it's just there's not really any upside to putting it on there if it's not relevant. Is what I'm trying to get at. Okay, that concludes all the do's and don'ts section. Now, what do you guys think? Was there at least one thing on there where you looked at your own resume and like, crap, maybe I did that? Come on. And I'll post these slides after so you can reference them later. So the next thing I wanted to talk about is cover letters, the why and the what. So I will say that when I started applying for jobs, cover letters probably confused me more than anything else. Just because there wasn't a very good like prompt. I didn't know what I was supposed to do with them. So I kind of want to go over some of that here. Like, what is even the point of a cover letter, right? So I would say that a cover letter is a short, like 1 to 2 paragraph preface to your resume that basically does 3 things. First of all, it politely introduces you to the company. Like this indicates effort that you were willing to spend on the job application. It also indicates why you were interested in the company. This indicates effort and enthusiasm. So, which might mean you're sort of a more eager employee who's willing to do a ton of work. And last but not least, it highlights what skills you have that make you a good fit for this specific position. So this serves more the technical side, and it's a way to highlight like what are the specific parts of your resume that make you a good fit. So introduction, why you're interested, and what skills you have. Those are basically the 3 things a cover letter does. So the parallel question is how even important is a cover letter? And I would say this is something that's very dependent on your industry and even the specific company and the resume reader. It's very subjective. In my personal experience, and seeing myself and also the other readers of Relativity, cover letters are only a small part of a person's application. Like, if done well, they're a bonus to the resume score, and they can help me find the good parts of the resume easier. But if they're done badly, I just ignore them. I will say, Relativity has moved lots of CS candidates to interview that did not submit a cover letter. And this leads me to believe that many CS internship seekers, even very strong ones, simply just don't bother with cover letters most of the time, and the industry is okay with this, because if we rejected every person without a cover letter, we'd have a much smaller candidate pool. However, there's no telling if this is also the case in other companies and other industries. It seems like cover letters can vary substantially by who's doing the reading. Is that the same with you, Ava?
Hi, chiming in. Yes, I would say that's the same or similar case as well. I think we've interviewed and hired multiple interns who have not submitted cover letters. It can help and it can hurt, right? I would say that if you were to submit a cover letter, one, obviously proofread it, and two, make sure that it isn't a generic cover letter that can be sent to any other company. There should be reasons why you want to send this specific cover letter to this specific company versus other companies. So, in the same way, Jamie recommends to have different resumes tailored for different positions or even different companies. The same would be true for a cover letter as well.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. So let's go over the parts of the cover letter now. The first part is a polite introduction. So your cover letter should begin with a brief introduction of who you are and what you're trying to do with your job application. This can be extremely simple, like, hi, my name is Jamie Smith, and I am an aspiring embedded software engineer seeking a firmware engineer intern position at X company. And if you want, you can add a little more detail, like a hook to grab the reader. You can make that good, like, hi, I'm Jamie Smith. I'm an aspiring embedded software engineer with several years practical experience designing and programming custom avionics systems, including one which went to space. I'm seeking a firmware position at X company. Like that kind of takes some of my experience and tries to grab the reader with it. But it's not required. And the number one thing to keep in mind with your cover letter is keep it short. The introduction and the cover letter should be short and simple. I'm not looking for the next Tolstoy here to just like blow me away with awesome literature and flowery sentences. I am much happier to see a short, utilitarian letter that gets straight to the point than one that just starts with like a paragraph or more of polite bump. Like the shorter it is, the more likely I am to actually read it and take it in. So I would say a maximum of 1 page double-spaced, but half a page is preferred. Just keep it short, keep it to the point. So another thing your cover letter does is indicates why you're interested. Like, give me some sort of explanation of why you want to work at this company. You could reference the work culture, like, I'm interested in your company because I've heard that compared to many others in the industry, it treats its employees more fairly and openly rejects grind culture. That's something you can say. That's nice. You could also talk about like mission / technology of the company. Like, I'm so excited to be a part of company X because it's attacking problem Y with a novel and promising approach. And I really want to be a part of that. Like, as long as you can do some research, it shows you did some research into what the company does and why it's interesting. You could also just reference industry itself. Like, I've always wanted to be a part of the aerospace industry because I dream about creating technology that lets us explore beyond Earth. So as long as you just give some sort of statement why you're interested and keep it honest. Even if you just want to praise the industry as a whole, honestly praising the industry can sometimes feel a lot more that authentic than trying to just say something about the company that may not be all the way like thought through. And the third thing to do is identify the best parts of your resume that are most suited for the job you're applying for and highlight those. This is where you really need to read the job posting carefully. Like, if the posting says we're looking for someone who can work independently to perform low-level firmware debugging and board bring up, like small company looking for someone to do like the whole thing. I would say, like, I have several years experience with moving boards through the design, firmware development, and bring up process. So I'm well suited to handle multiple aspects of embedded system development on a small team. If you guys aren't embedded developers, what I said may not make a lot of sense, but basically the idea is you find what they're specifically looking for in the posting, and then try to say, like, what is the part of your resume that actually is relevant to that, and highlight that part just like in a few sentences. Or if the posting says, like, we need someone with experience optimizing software to process high volumes of data on consumer hardware. I could say, like, I have experience using high performance computing tools like HDF5, OpenMP, MPI, CUDA to process data in parallel and at high speeds. Additionally, my embedded experience helps me understand at an essential level what a computer is doing to process data and how it can be sped up. So I'm referencing like the stuff in my resume about high performance computing stuff. And also I'm referencing like my embedded skills. So I'm saying these are the things in my resume that are a good fit based on the job posting. And that's honestly really it. You don't need any more than these three things. A good cover letter can really just be like 4 to 6 sentences that just cover the three things I mentioned. You don't need or really want anything else. And big warning here, don't have obvious templating in your cover letter. Like I've seen several variants of this in my time. Giving the wrong company name, misspelling the company name, saying that you're excited to help make a product that's useful to consumers for a company that does not make consumer products. Having a really abstract technical section that basically just goes over every skill in your resume. I've seen all of those. And this pretty much negates the value of your cover letter because it proves you weren't willing to spend any effort on it. If you really want to use the template to write your cover letter for multiple companies, fine, but don't make it obvious that you did so. And now I just kind of, so that's pretty much everything I got about cover letters. Any questions about this stuff? Does it make sense? This is your chance to learn about cover letters. All right, Nina says thumbs up. Okay, moving forward. Now I just wanted to get into like a little bit of a conclusion of the presentation section. Because, so what I can say is that if you write your resume according to the stuff I presented here, and if you have the experience to back it up, you will be a cut above a lot of the CS candidates we see at Relativity. What's the best way to get experience like that? Working at RPL is a great start. The more stuff you can say you did at RPL, the more pretty awesome experience you have to put on your resume. Relativity has accepted a large number of RPL students, and we've made some pretty big splashes at Relativity. So the name RPL carries more than a little bit of weight with the admissions people at Relativity. I'm not sure if this is true for any other aerospace companies, but we can certainly hope it is. But that said, it's still a crapshoot. Like, having worked in admissions, I can say that there's a healthy bit of random chance involved in whether your resume gets accepted. Like this year, we had a huge number of qualified CS candidates, and generally, we would interview and accept the first ones we saw that fit the bill. And while we always interviewed at least 2 to 3 candidates before making a decision, there was still a huge number of candidates that we didn't get the chance to evaluate, purely because of the arbitrary order of resumes. Like, I think around this time, it was around 50% of the resumes we didn't even crack open before we hired almost everyone we needed. So if your resume gets passed up, especially for a popular job, don't despair. There's a good chance that it didn't have anything to do with you. And you could definitely make the argument that this is really unfair, that it's not fair that companies can sometimes just hire people without necessarily giving every resume a fair shake. And I don't think you're necessarily wrong about that, but you also kind of need to look at it from the company's end, which is if it takes like 4 people 20 hours each to go through like half the resumes, and we find enough qualified candidates for that, then there's not really a reason to have a bunch of engineers spend another 20 hours going through the other half of the resumes when we've already found candidates who we need. So unfortunately, it just doesn't really make sense from the company's side to necessarily treat every resume equally, even though I think maybe in a perfect world we would. That's just how the procedure works here. So, and this kind of creates an experience problem. Like, a fact I've observed is that competition is really fierce for certain popular job postings, like major aerospace companies, big tech companies. I can't speak in absolutes, but what I will say is that it's a major minus to your resume if you don't have any prior internship experience. It doesn't disqualify you, but it does put you behind a lot of other candidates who do have this experience. It's just a question of like, relative to other candidates who do have internship experience, it's hard for someone without experience to operate at the same or better level. It doesn't disqualify you, but it's just, it puts you lower in the running. So this creates like a solid catch-22, which is how do you get work experience if companies will only hire those with work experience? It's a real problem for a lot of college students, absolutely. And here's the strategy I suggest for this, which is kind of based on my own experience and other experiences of people I know, which is for your very first internship, you need to branch out quite a lot. Like, it's fine to apply to the big, like, dream companies if you want to, but don't count on getting in. It's kind of just like applying to colleges. So instead, what I'd really recommend is applying to lots of small or less attractive companies. Like these are the places that lose candidates to SpaceX and lose candidates to Google. So that means they're just going to have lower standards for interns, and they're going to be more willing to take a chance on a candidate with less experience. Like working at these companies may be dull, and it might not even be in your field of choice. Like Lena, Rita, me, we all had sort of middling to bad experiences at our first job, I believe. I know certainly Rita and I were kind of hating our lives for the first summer. Like my first job was so bad it made me seriously consider switching majors. But I think that was that was an outlier. But it really doesn't matter in the big picture. Like once you get that first job, then you can come back the next year and you can apply to much more prized job postings. Like it's all once you get that first paid internship, that just makes your resume look so much more attractive for everything else after. So really try and apply not just to like the big fancy aerospace companies, but apply to like second and third tier job postings. And it's really just going to be the first step on a long career journey. So that's kind of that's pretty much all I've got on the presentation section. That makes sense. I realize this is difficult, and this is something that I'm not sure I would have accepted someone telling me when I was your age, I wouldn't have accepted this kind of deal. But I think that I'm starting to think I really was thinking that this is the truth of the situation, that it's very hard to get these positions starting out. So you really just, for your very first internship, you need to have low standards. You need to apply to any place that will take you. No. Let's see. Oh, whoops. Maybe I'll take want to do like a 5-minute break, then I'll get into the resume review section.
Sure. You've got a question in the chat though.
Oh, whoops. Lena asks, can you speak about how valuable recommendations from relativity employees who know your technical abilities are to landing an internship for landing an interview for an internship? Also, can you speak whether being an upperclassman gives you an upper hand in getting an interview? Those are good questions. So I would say for relativity, having a recommendation helps your resume get through resume review and to the point where you get an interview. It doesn't really do a whole lot after that. So I think it kind of depends on the strength of the recommendation and the team and stuff. But if you can get a current employee to recommend you, then that does help your resume get expedited. And I will say that I'm happy to give a recommendation to anyone who I know what they've done in RPL. Like if I've actually seen you work, then I can definitely give you a recommendation for relativity. Just let me know. And another thing is, can you speak whether being underclassman helps you? Whether being upperclassman helps you land an interview. I would say that for me, I don't really care about someone's class standing. I only care about their internships and their lab experience. So if your resume says you're a freshman, but you have 3 years of technical internships, then you're probably going to get an interview regardless of that. I just look at how much experience you have. I will say that it's of course challenging for people who are current freshmen and sophomores to have much technical experience. So a lot of times that will give them an effective disadvantage. Honestly, I think if I were starting a company, I would want to say 10% of our interns are going to be freshmen, 20% of our interns are going to be sophomores, or something like affirmative class action or something, because it really does make it very hard for freshmen and sophomores to get internships because of this experience requirement. But unfortunately, that's not really how it works at Relativity and probably in most places. So we're just looking at total amount of experience. So basically, does the actual number on your resume matter? No, but does your number of years effectively matter? Yes. That makes sense, Lena?
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, let's take 5-minute break, then I'll get into resume review. Okay, back. Just had to rest my voice for a minute. Starting to get scratchy. Okay, so now we're gonna look at some resumes. So got 4 submissions so far. I just did some basic anonymizing of them, and so blocked out some other parts. So now let's look over these resumes, and let's see what we've got here. So resume 1, we can see they have an about me section, mainly interested in getting involved with the space energy industries, being engineer, actor and creator, speaking languages, and also learning each other. It's like something like this. I don't know. It's fine. I don't think this is necessarily what I'm looking for when I read a resume, but it doesn't do any harm. Bachelor of Engineering, good to see. Relevant coursework. See, like this is something that I could consider removing, the relevant coursework stuff, because it's just not really, as I've said, this stuff about courses doesn't really mean a whole lot to me. And also, it's just a lot to read through when I'm not necessarily looking for a specific course. So I would consider deleting relevant coursework. Organizations, good to see. So relativity space, we have a lot of experience in relativity. Designed 3 circuit boards with Altium Designer for modular valve control, the transfer of 300 watts. See, like this is an example of a great way to show like how your thing was useful. Like saved a lot of money per rec. That's a good example of that. The other requirements. Like this second bullet, I feel like maybe it's a little long. Like, you could probably delete this section, unless they want someone who's proven experience surviving Florida wildlife, which is fair. This one, like, I really want to see some details in this third bullet here, like a revamp the software deployment and management infrastructure, like using what technologies. Instead of just saying revamped, you could say like, I don't know, redid it using Docker, redid it using Puppet. I don't know what tools are managed to manage servers, but so I would probably say remove detail from the second bullet, add more detail to the third bullet. Also, in saying wrote software in what language? Supported development and deployment of DAX, hardware software interface layer. I would say that this acronym DAX, is that the same as DAQ? I don't know. As a resume reader, I can say I don't know what that acronym means, but maybe I'm just ignorant. This is good, like initial bring up of a distributed DAX system. So that's like I have experience being on the ground supporting stuff. I did stuff that was real. That's a good thing to see. Profiled and optimized performance of individual components. Like that's cool to see, but I also could see a lot more detail. Like what were these components written in? What did you use to profile them? What was the data distribution and communication protocol? So long as you're allowed to share it, then that's really useful to see. I will say that some companies do have limits on what you're allowed to share. Like, as a general rule, you can't share like the specific technologies you used for what. But however, you can generally say what standards you use. Like at Relativity, they told us specifically, you are allowed to say what technologies you've worked with, but you cannot necessarily say that you worked with them on the vehicle or like what you use them for, because that's like an ITAR violation. So like I can say I have experience designing IE 1588 PTP timing systems, but I cannot say what those timing systems were used for. So that's kind of the struggle. So maybe that could affect some of these bullets. This is good. Like it's great to see what you use your system for. But also, I would really like to see what specific technologies did you use to build this. Specifics are always nice. In-depth debugging and ELF analysis of closed source libraries. Oh no, that sounds miserable. I'm sorry. But to identify integration issues, this is great. This is like I have experience debugging real C++ systems, and by real we mean undocumented and dealing with vendor BS. This bullet is good. Optimize data storage and retrieval for high velocity, high throughput instrumentation data. This one is, again, a little vague, like using what technologies? This is good, especially if you're applying for like a data position. Hey, CMake, hey. I will say that this term is kind of confusing. Designed and implemented scheduler-based class architecture for primary firmware loads. I don't exactly know what a primary firmware load is reading this. Like, does that mean like flight firmware? Does it mean like primary firmware as opposed to the secondary firmware that some other team was writing? That term is a little vague reading this. Also, again, showing what language you used it in would be really nice. This is good, the third bullet. I like that. And then now we get to the RPL experience. So let a team of 25 members design, build, and test and maintain all electronic systems and infrastructure for USC RPL. Manage the build of in-house data acquisition unit. See, like, this is a good example, again, to compare your work to someone else's. Say, like, we built this thing that rivals a commercial product. That's a really good thing to say. Most of you guys who've worked on Microdac can say that. This is good, like, speaks to leadership experience. Like, if my thing says I'm supposed to find people with like team lead experience, that definitely speaks to this bullet. Though it doesn't speak, this doesn't have a lot of technical experience specifics, but I think this is mainly meant to talk about leadership experience, so that's good. Manage the build of the next version of our in-house flight computer, must travel and transit data from past the carbon line. Debugging embedded system failures, that's good. Though I do think that it would be cool to say what this flight computer was programmed using. Putting some languages in this bullet would be nice. And also tools. Like, I don't know if you remember the presentation, but I said like Hamster was C++/embedOS. Because hey, maybe there's someone who's looking for embedOS. There's probably people there looking for C++. Enable RPL, right? Cool. Now the skill section, software. So like, I would definitely recommend trying to separate out this into 2 or 3 sections of like software very experienced and like software some experience or something. Unless you really are very experienced with all of these, in which case it's okay. Let's see. Hardware, Verilog. Yeah, these are pretty good. Like, and some of these may not necessarily be relevant for most software positions, but it's only a tiny part of the resume. Like, most of this is software stuff with like 1 or 2 circuit board bullets mixed in there. So this is pretty good. Like, this is definitely a resume I would move on, especially if we're looking for like, yeah, I would definitely advance this resume for like flight software and or like back-end software. Or embedded software, heck. So I think this is a fairly good example of how to fit a lot of experience at one company onto a like resume, because objectively this is a lot of stuff from Relativity that's put together, but it comes from having a lot of legitimate experience here. So like, this is a case where the person had a lot of experience and was like, I'll put it on their resume. So a lot of this is useful. However, I do think that there are a couple of things on here, like this section is long enough that it's a little bit hard to remember. Like, looking through this, it gets to the point where it's a little bit hard for me to keep, like, if someone asks me after reading this, what did the person do? It's actually a little bit difficult to think through all this. So I might consider trying to shorten this section a little bit. Honestly, my advice is if you're applying for a job that's not firmware, you could maybe consider removing the firmware section, because I think that that's a little bit less relevant to like your main experience, which is in like backend and DAC systems. Or at least maybe contracting that down. Versus if you're, and maybe if you're not applying for a like position that's related to hardware, if you're applying for a back-end position, you could consider removing a couple of the PCB related bullets and just focusing on your back-end experience. But it's kind of a subjective thing, and this is not bad at all. So my one thing is I think this is a little bit on the longer side, but it's still good. That's my assessment. Okay, next up. Okay, so by the way, if anyone else wants me to look at their resume, I got 3 more to go through currently. Feel free to send it over. I don't know if I'll have time to anonymize it during this, but if you are okay with it not being anonymized, or if you want to anonymize it yourself, just hand it to me and I'll look over it. Let's see what we got here. So first of all, this person has let's see, so education stuff, Bachelor of Science. So like, again, with technical skills, I would really prefer to see this separated out into like 1 or 2 layers, like lots of experience, some experience. And I'd also kind of prefer to see programming languages separated out from things like Git and like Microsoft Office. Those are more tools. They're not really programming languages. This is kind of vague. Like, I'm not really sure what to, this is so vague that I can't really make much out of it. So I would say either make it more specific or delete it. Let's see. This is good, autonomous testing procedure, but I'd also like to see more details, like using what? What frameworks did you use? What tools did you use? Even if you can't say what the process was, you can still tell me what specific tools you used to do it. Created a small satellite line program. This is good because it shows like kind of personal initiative, like as lead, I created this instead of like somebody else told me what to do here. Set up this one is like very vague. Like it's vague enough that I can't really make much out of it reading the resume. Like, what was the robot like? Lego Mindstorm? Was it VexIQ? Was it FRC Robotics? What type of robot? And like, what skills did you use to do that? This one also, like, it's vague enough that it's cool. It's good experience to have, but it's vague enough that I can't really make much out of it seeing it on your resume. Also, if you have positions you've been at for less than a year, I would definitely recommend putting the start month here, because it's hard to know if you've been here for like 1 month or like 11 months. And just more detail in this would be much appreciated. Develop software for microprocessors and microcontrollers to control these software. This is good. This is good, but I would also really like to see specific programming languages. Like, did you use C++? Did you use Python? Did it involve like image processing? Give me some more details. Develop, yeah, like embedded software for what? I'd really like to see more details. Web applications using what tools? Like, I think it was like React.js that was used for ordering system. Was it like a Discord bot? I want to hear more deets. Like, logistics lead, like how many people did you logistics, or how much stuff? Like, did you get 100 people out there to the desert? What sort of stuff have you done? Undergrad teaching assistant, that's good. Tech incubator. Okay, so like constructed equipment. What type of equipment? What did you construct it with? Yeah, it's like this is an interesting resume. This is one that I think that I might struggle with a little bit if I was reading it for relativity position, just because there's a lot of places where specific information is lacking. Like it says that it's like it says proficient in C++, Java, Python, but it doesn't really say what languages were used for what projects. So it's hard for me to point to a specific thing where the person has used this. So it's a little bit difficult for me as a reader. So, and there's a lot of positions on here. Like I might recommend maybe just getting rid of one or two of these positions so that you can go into more detail about the other ones. Like I would probably say maybe get rid of the course producer one, because I think that this is something I maybe should have mentioned earlier. I think that given the choice between a like course producer or teacher's assistant position and a real technical internship, the technical internship is much more valuable to me. The course producer position still has some value, but I think that it's less valuable to me, especially if it's for a lower level class. Like if you were a course producer for a graduate class, then that means a little more because it means you are probably very, very familiar with that course's material. But if you're like course producer for a lower level CS class, then that's a little less valuable to me because it's like, okay, it just helps reinforce the stuff that most candidates know. I'm saying this as someone who was a course producer for a long time. I loved being a course producer, but I have to face the sad reality that it's not as useful on a resume as something like a tech internship. So basically, recommendations are more detail, maybe get rid of one or two of the positions and focus on the others with a lot more detail. That makes sense, everyone? All right, now on to person 3. So let's see. So avionics. So avionics team member. This is from someone who's, I believe, a little newer. So like one thing that I would probably say is that this is a little confusing. Optimize, configure, and construct hierarchical schematics and PDBs. That feels a little like kind of word salady. Like what I would probably recommend changing it to is something like designed hierarchical schematics and then constructed them and then like ordered and then built PCBs for avionics projects. Like designed hierarchical schematics and then built PCBs for avionics projects. That's a little clearer because you can't really configure a PCB. And like, yeah, it's good to say program and debug C++ code, but it's also, you could also mention like embed OS potentially. Validate. And like utilization of hardware tools, that's a little frustratingly vague because like what hardware tools? It'd be great to give a little more specific it'd be great to give a little more specific information about what hardware tools you used. typo there. Avionic. Seems like one of Keshav's memes. In-flight circuit board. I should stop correcting grammar here. And see, like, I'd say this is kind of an example of like how to do resumes as a sort of someone with less real practical experience. Like this person doesn't really have much experience outside of RPL, so they added some other stuff that is not real, that's not necessarily technical experience, but still speaks to like ability to like work with other people, run things, etc. And that's totally fine. I think that this is totally fine as probably the best you can do with the experience that you have. That's what you got to do with a resume. Like, I think that there's probably lots of companies out there who are looking for like entry-level hardware engineer intern that would be interested in this. And as once you have a little more experience, you could start to sort of push some of this less technical stuff out and replace it with the other internships. And again, having these ranked by how good you are with each one would be helpful. Okay, on to person 4. Okay, so never see. Oh, geez, my cat's being annoying. Stop it. Ugh. He's picked up this thing where when he wants to get my attention, he just like scratches his claws on this thing of metal and makes the most god-awful sound. And as soon as I move towards him, he runs away. He just wants me to play chase. That's his end goal. Everything with this cat is about chase. Okay. So this is pretty good. This is useful. This is a good thing to have for applied electromagnetics because a lot of people who are like current juniors have not taken that yet. So that actually is relevant. That's a good question as to whether to put your high school stuff on there. Like, I would say maybe keep the awards from high school stuff, but maybe you could lose the other high school stuff just because it's not really what I'm necessarily looking for relativity internships. Definitely keep the awards though. So I will say, like, reading this one, the thing I extract out of it is that you didn't really get a whole lot of technical experience outside of maybe this last bullet, like bit level analysis to troubleshoot important flight transponder system. I may or may not have done some slightly similar stuff at Relativity for our very stubborn transponders. But anyway, so I really like to hear a little more about the technical experience from this one. Like, I want to hear more about that. And like something like this, I'm a little divided because on the one hand, it's very good to talk about like what you did at your like real internships, but also there isn't a whole lot about here that applies directly to technical stuff unless I'm just reading it wrong. So I'd really like to see if more of these bullets were related to like actual like programming or hardware design stuff. I'd really like to see those change to say like what specific programs you used or wrote, what hardware was it related to. And if not, then I'd say maybe keep them for now, but maybe consider removing them later once you have a little more technical experience and maybe collapse this down to just a couple of bullets. It's a difficult situation. Whereas if you were applying for more of like a launch ops role, then this stuff's a lot more relevant. I'm just talking about from a comp sci perspective. USC Rocket Propulsion Lab. Configure, build, and optimize hierarchical schematics. That's good. Oh, wait. Hey, wait a minute. Configure, build, and optimize hierarchical schematics. Have you guys been sharing resume bullets? Whatever. But this is the same feedback I guess I gave before, which is like, I think it's easier to say like designed schematics and built them into PCBs, just because it's a little bit hard to parse what exactly is meant here. Create, discuss, and debug C++ code for flight data analysis and flight embedded software. Like, oh, this is a good bullet. I want to hear more. I want to hear like what libraries did you use? Like, was this using Eigen? Was this using like Seagal? What did you do? What libraries did you use to do it? Validate antennas, circuits, and systems with a vector network analyzer and spectrum analyzer through S11. This is good. Like, if there's someone looking for an RF engineer stuff, like this is it. This is exactly what they're looking for an RF engineer intern. But I want to see more about the C++ code. Like, what was the data analysis stuff? What was the firmware stuff? Give me more details. Applied PCB and schematic knowledge, design LNA and 3v9 switching bolt power regulator circuits for flight PCBs. That's good. And like, I would say that on this, I would say that on this, like, I just want to see more about the PCB stuff. Like, maybe give like 1 or 2 examples of what PCBs you built, what schematics you designed, because I know you've got a lot of them. I really want to see that. Now, so leadership, define short-term and long-term goals for avionics team. Manage and provide technical guidance. This is pretty good. Like, this is good if we're looking for someone who has like, for companies that are looking for someone with like leadership experience. This is good. Like, that's good for hardware engineering stuff. So led and guided radio testing, operation, and analysis procedures for radio. Hey, rangefinder stuff. I think I mentioned this before, but I feel free to link, like, if there's publications, not necessarily just the rangefinder, but like, feel free to link the rangefinder publication. Like, that's something I do not mind at all if you guys ride on the project coattails with that. Like, just link the paper so they can like have a look at it. And I've definitely seen resume readers go like, oh, wow, this person was involved in a published paper. That's a big plus. I don't know if the rangefinder exactly counts as the same way as like a scientific publication, but it's still something that is like a big paper that you can mention. So feel free to link that. That's going to be a big plus for most resume readers. This is kind of frustratingly vague, like especially in terms of previous revision of boards. I think it's in reference to the previous bullet, but I only know that because of my experience at RPL. So I'd maybe word this as like based on previous, like based on issues seen with size and performance of radios, assisted or helped create the second revision that fixed these issues or something. Like, what were the specific issues? What were the boards? Conducted critical high pressure avionics launch, pre-launch operations. Yeah, like this is a little bit on the vague side, like GSE user guiding. Like, I think you meant to say like teaching GSE users, but I might split this into 2 bullets. Like, as avionics lead, created procedures for like using the avionics unit and setting up GSE, and then also do this something like debugged system. I have that on my resume, like did a lot of critical debugging. That's definitely its own bullet. Like, what did you debug? Maybe even give like a super simple situation that you like were able to fix on your own, because that kind of example is worth a lot. Let's see. Team Designer, C++, MATLAB, Java and C, Microsoft Word. Okay, so software is fine. I would probably make a separate programming languages section though. And I might also give like an experience level for each programming language. Excuse me. Hardware, digital multimeter, sonogram, oscope, VNA, spectrum analyzer. This is good, but I will say for PCB team people, I might recommend having giving a specific amount of experience. Or giving a specific level of experience, like what kind of stuff have you soldered? Like, can you solder like SMD rework? Because I think there are some hardware engineers at Relativity who don't really know how to do SMD rework. So that's a plus if you can. Some more specifics would be appreciated. Okay, so looking at this one from a higher level. So this is I can tell that you kind of try to do something interesting here with like dividing out your leadership experience from your project's experience. Only I think the problem is that it's a little bit, the definition is a little muddy because some of the stuff under here really kind of should go under like avionics team member or something. So what I might consider doing is maybe like cut here and then move all these bullets up to here. It's good to have this talking about leadership, but I think having more than 4 bullets of your resume dedicated only to leadership experience, that's going to start stealing from your ability to provide technical experience. Because for a technical internship, I'm primarily looking for technical experience. Leadership experience is good, but it's not the main thing I'm looking for. I know you've got a lot of technical experience to put on here. So yeah, I would consider like moving these up here and contracting the leadership section. I also maybe would consider getting rid of this projects subheading because I would say RPL counts as experience, not a project. It's really like most people tend to list labs right next to the like internships, and that's totally normal. The other thing I will say is that looking at this resume, it kind of feels like your like PCB experience and your software experience are sort of fighting each other for space. Like I can tell you got a lot of stuff you put on here, and I feel like the PCB stuff kind of won. Like much more stuff is dedicated to PCB work than software. And if that's what you were going for, then that's fine. But I do think that it makes me struggle a little bit for software side. Just because there's stuff I know you've done that I don't really see on here spelled out. So you really might want to consider making 2 versions of your resume. One that gives a lot of detail on software stuff and like kind of fills in the rest with some electrical stuff, and one that only gives a little bit of detail on software and gives mostly electrical. And that one would be pretty similar to what you have now. Because I think this has a pretty decent amount of detail for electrical, but could really use more detail for software. And all right, that's everything I got. Hope that was useful, you guys. And thanks for showing up.